Greetings, Ren. This is your final critique for Art 828, Creative Photography. When I first look at your images, I see some pretty standard landscapey photographs with nice cloud formations. As I scroll down a little bit more, they become, to me, a little bit more intriguing and expressive, and almost a little bit more personal. Up top, they seem a bit more generic in a sense. The other thing I'm struck by is the difference in blues, the blues here versus the blues here. Now that certainly happens on different days, different sky colors, even different settings. Though in a portfolio like this, I almost want to get some consistency in that, so that drives me a little bit better. The other thing I see and think is these three are in almost the exact same composition. I mean, the trees are slightly different, but we have, like a third to a quarter trees, the rest sky with white fluffy clouds. These three set up, it's almost like a different direction, because I could see keep going in this manner, and just having all these just trees and a little bit in the lower foreground information, and then the skies. So we have these three, and then we change. The sky color changes, the amount of tree changes. And then we have another change here. We're zooming in. Another change where we introduce this pond. I really am intrigued by this pond, that orangeness of it, and then how that orangeness is reflected, particularly this image, in the landscape. And I really like that photograph. And I want to play with it a little bit more. I want to push it a little bit more. I want to bring that sky, the blue of that sky, closer to this, and these clouds themselves closer to the contrast of this and this. And I think we could get more balance in this image. And I also want to maybe push, I don't know if it'd be selecting just the foreground and either more saturation or more contrast, or maybe a little bit of both. Not a lot, just to add a little more punch here, because I like the balance in this image. I like the orange here and how it's reflected in the landscape. This photograph is just nice as it sits, nice. As I look at this top view, this is the one that really jumps out at me. The one where things really come together. The one that has something a little bit different. I love clouds too. They're just fascinating to look at. And in these first three, you set up what you are talking about in your artist statement, where you're talking about looking up as a child, and I get that child sense of wonderment and imagination when I look at these images. I did that too. I lie in our field behind our house and just look up at the sky, and watch them change form, change shape, and use my imagination to transform them into things. It's just a wonderful, fun pastime, leisure activity. And these three images do that. And it seems like you could have almost gone on and just, create a whole portfolio like these three. But you do shift focus a little bit. And I don't think that's bad. But maybe what we need to consider is the order that we present them in. Maybe we need to break them up a little bit, because that's where I run into trouble here, is I have these three that create one body of work, and then I jump to this image, and then I kind of jump back to the previous sort of image. And I think that was Janelle, she commented on this photograph where she really liked the cropping of this one, and she almost wishes the other ones got a little tighter like this one. And I can see why. It creates a nice connection between this tree form here in particular to me, and then what's going on in the clouds. There's that movement, and I like the little bits of blue here and blue here and blue here. Like, if you got rid of those little bits of blue, your image would be less balanced. It's like looking at one of Mondrian's Distil paintings, just that red, yellow, and blue, black, white, rectilinear lines. Where you have that big thing of red, and there's a little thing of blue and a little thing of yellow up below. And those little bits of blue and yellow are so important because they hold that paint together. Get rid of them, the whole balance falls apart. And that's how this photograph feels. I like that blue. So there's a really nice balance here. I can see why Janelle reacted to it and almost wanted to see more in this sort of style. This image I'm less intrigued by. It's just kind of there to me. There is something in the shape and the form of like the edge of the pond, how it creates a sort of triangular form. I see a few triangles in the trees, and how that kind of drives my imagination to look for those shapes a little bit more. But I'm not left with much more to think about than that. It's this image that really creates a thought process in me, and I become curious about this body of water because that is such a non-normal color that we see. And then I look and I see all these orangish rocks in here, and I even like the telephone pole, and then the nice fluffy clouds in here. This seems like, again, like almost a completely different body of work. Because this image isn't just about the clouds. This image actually for me is less about the clouds and more about this foreground information. I want to know, is this a quarry? Was it a mine? Is this a natural lake? It feels unnatural to me. I just have a lot of questions about it that I want to look at and answer. And I love the balance of it. I love the strength of this tree right in the middle there, and then the reflection of it down here. I really also like this little bit of green here. And I'm kind of curious if I had a little bit more, like over here, if I could just see a little bit more of that tree, though I don't know if it matters that much. I kind of like it as it sits. I like that little bit of green because it helps balance this out and then balance that out. So this photograph to me is like a new landscape photography image. And I've just been looking at this site in Facebook called New Landscape Photography. And it's all about these human and natural interactions. And that's what I think about in this, the unnatural orange of that water. This, to me, screams what you talked about here: global warming, human intrusion, destroying our landscape. That's what this image says to me. So, and then we start to shift in another very different direction, and also an interesting direction where you become much more expressive and free. And to me, it feels more like the painterly side. The first things you posted on Flickr that I saw were your paintings, which were abstract, expressionistic. At least that's my first impression on them. And, I start to see that aesthetic start to creep into your photographs. And I like that creep. I like seeing how you are just personally engaging with these images and beginning to implement your own vision on them. I love this light streak, and it's kind of subtle too. It's not overt. You don't completely abstract this image with a bunch of crazy, funky colors. You just suddenly have this intrusion in there, and that is, I find, interesting, curious, piques my interest, makes me want to look more and think more about the images. Now, at the same time, you do have just that sort of, quarter trees and more cloud information, and those childlike qualities that we saw in those first three images are evident in here, but now you're up in the scale, you're pushing it more, and to me this is becoming more interesting, and I think in a sense more personal and more you. I don't know you, Ren, but having looked at your paintings, this feels more you, more your style. So you're kind of bringing in that idea of the childhood, looking up the clouds, and then who you are and who that helped you to become, and that relationship between you now and you as a child. I see that beginning to come together here, and I find that fascinating. And I want to see more of this. And, in a sense, we take a step back with this and go back to more of those childhood imagery. But we also get some, like the light here in the clouds, I would say is technically incorrect. You have blown out highlights. But at the same time, that sort of thing does connect me back to this image, and I can see these two images functioning together in the same body of work, even though this one's a bit more subtle, even more subtle. I mean, this is fairly subtle, but this is even more subtle in how it introduces those ideas and expressionistic feelings. So I like the connection between these two. And, this one, though, we get in a very different sky, and this is a step back, and it's not just the fluffy clouds, it's not the imagination clouds either. This is kind of a very different thing. We have this urban church foreground environment, wires crossing in here, and a very foreboding sky. And so the childhood imagination isn't as apparent in this because, at least for me, because when I see the sky, I'm starting to think of those thunderstorms, tornadoes, safety issues, and my imagination doesn't have that time to just wonder as I do when I have, this sky. I have this sky, I'm safe, and I have time to contemplate and relax. And so they have a very different feel, though they are similar. This image seems, working with the previous image, seems to fit in that sort of genre. Here I can see some other ideas creeping in, which also begin to fit with the expressionistic things you started doing. We're moving back, a different idea. And it's funny, you've got this one subject, these clouds that are really holding this together. So, and I'm trying to figure out if this is all working together, or if they really need to be separate and broken down into separate bodies of work, or if we can deal with this one thing all in the same time, which might be a possibility. But I still think you need to think a little bit more about order and how you mix them up, because I don't think it worked when these similar ideas are all like grouped together. It starts to create like a discontinuity in thought. It'd also be more continuous if they're more evenly distributed. I like this photograph, though. I like how you played with the blurriness of these trees, and I'm assuming that's post-processing. Potentially could be done in the camera, but feels very much like post-processing. And then you upped this contrast in the sky and the playfulness of that, and it feels expressive like the image with the light streaking through it did earlier in this. And this, is somewhere in between a new body of work. Though kind of like how we have the suburban landscape, and then this, which is somewhat desaturated, and then a completely desaturated sky. It does put the emphasis on those clouds, as opposed to this everyday sort of scene I can easily ignore. But I do look at the wonderful dynamics of the clouds. And this is definitely more your expressive range. We have a slight variation here, and I think either one of these can work. And I'm not sure which one I prefer. Here we have these sort of arbitrary-ish colors that streak through the sky and create this very strong line. And here it just becomes a sort of value transition and a bit more subtle. Either or could work. I'm kind of leaning towards the color one. That becomes something interesting. And here's just a nice texture. Now you've completely departed from landscape, and now we're just looking almost abstract expressionistically at the sky as your palette, and you just capturing that. And it makes me think more of the Equivalent series by Alfred Stieglitz in the early 20th century, who turned his camera to the clouds because he felt they were equivalent to human feelings and emotions. And that ties in very much with abstract expressionism, which is where I'm assuming to some degree you relate to as a painter. This feels very similar to that, and I like this. This has some of that manipulation and emotion, and just that sky and the darkness and the lightness and the contrast and the midtones. And this is a very nice image. I can look at that for quite a while, and I'm left looking at this very curious about so many of these images, wanting to look at so many, but so many different. If there's two, though, that I would take out these two photographs. I'm not sure that they're fitting at all with what you're trying to do. Though I really love this as a standalone image, though some minor manipulation, color, contrast, saturation adjustments would, I think, help punch that photograph up to what I think it would need to be. But they don't, I think, overall, as I look at this, fit. Now, we get rid of those two. Everything else fits in some way, shape, or form, but you have very divergent ways of dealing with it. And I think they can, in the end, work together. And because I like how I get these different thoughts and feelings, from the childhoodness to maybe the perhaps more complex adult sort of feelings, as where you are. However, I do not want to present these in a sort of narrative fashion in any way, shape, or form. I think that would harm the images. The images themselves aren't narratives, they're expressionistic, and I think to maintain that expressionistic feel, we need to mix them up a little bit. We need to take, start with that image, and then put that image in there, and then maybe one of these images up next to that, and then go back to this as the fourth image, and then we can throw in, oh, and you didn't even include that one I really liked, fourth image could be this one, and then move to that one, and then go back here. I want to find the other photograph that you had and manipulate. Maybe you, in the end, just didn't feel like it fit, though I very much feel like this could fit as even another permutation of your expressive explorations in these clouds. I like this image, and then I also just saw, as I was looking at that, actually I like that one with a little bit of pink a little bit better than the straight up grayscale. This one is better. I like that photograph right there. This one, you're playing with positive negative here. The negative of this fits in perfectly as a whole into that whole body of work and how you are pushing and exploring the sky. And to me, it is that psychology of it, much like abstract expressionism is this exploration of psychology and moment and intuition. That image totally, those 2-3 images totally fit within this body of work. I still am convinced these two don't. So, all right, Ren, those are some of my thoughts on there. I appreciate your efforts in class, and I wish you luck in the future.